Morning, everyone. Starting to make some progress now with the painting. As you can see, most of the washes are in the sky area, and I've put some sunlit colour on the front of the house. I've been working wet into wet, so that means this whole area here, I wet the paper with clear water, and I've dropped all these colours in so that you can see there are no hard edges anywhere in the painting at this moment in time. And that's because I want those soft shapes in the sky. And also, I've got a problem that I need to deal with here, and it relates to the top of the house. Just going back to the tonal sketch, I decided that I wanted the facade of the house to be sunlit, and to give a nice strong tonal contrast to that, I wanted a dark cloud over the top of it. Now, you won't see this in the tonal sketch because I've cheated a little bit here, but the right-hand side of these chimney pots needs to be highlighted, as does the top of the roof. The issue really is managing edges. And this is hugely important because watercolour is a transparent medium. It's a problem that crops up time and again in watercolours, particularly more complicated watercolours and more considered studio paintings. If you look here, you'll see what I mean. I've painted one shape, so this square here, just in a simple wash of blue, let it dry, and then painted another one over the top. Exactly the same tonal strength, but you can see this area in the middle is darker because that one on top of that one with transparency creates a dark shape in the middle. So the problem for painting the roof and the chimneys of the house was that if I'd painted the sky down and stopped at this area here and created a hard edge by painting round the chimneys and across the top of the roof, I've then got to paint in the roof, the chimneys, and avoid this problem here of the two washes overlapping each other and creating a hard outline around this edge, or not painting up to it in order to avoid that happening and leaving a white gap. So let me show you what I mean. I've now got to paint a complicated and reasonably wide area very, very carefully, trying not to overlap. It's not easy to do. You can see I've just gone over the edge there. Or I could be leaving a white gap there so that I don't have those two areas clashing. And you can just about get away with it in a sketch, but on a larger painting, it's something that you need to give some thought to. Just to show you exaggerated, you can see I've gone over a lot there. And just to exaggerate it, I'm going right over the edge there, and you can see where the problem starts. So the way to deal with this is to drop this paler colour relative to the sky in while this whole area is wet, and then I can put the darker cloud in behind the house, and using a technique called negative painting, I can then paint one edge crisply around the top of those chimneys. And because there's no hard edge here at the moment, just one will create the definition that I need without any risk of overlap. And this is what watercolour is all about. It's about strategy, it's about thinking ahead, it's understanding where you're going to have clashes of edges, where you want soft edges, where you want hard edges, how you're going to manage that. Because what you want to avoid is a situation where you're essentially just filling in shapes all the time. It becomes a little bit rather like painting by numbers, and it becomes quite apparent in a watercolour. Now, the other thing I want to show you is it's a similar kind of issue, but where we have these tree boughs and branches coming down across dark cloud, I want to have highlights in here, and I haven't been able to leave them. That's difficult to do when you're painting wet into wet because it's very free. I want all these colours to be running together as they are, and you don't then have an option of leaving hard edges around where you want your highlights to be. And generally in watercolour, there's 3 different techniques for doing that. I've done a little example here, and I'll show you the different ways of dealing with this. Of course, if I'm not painting wet into wet, then I can just paint around here. But again, I've still got this sort of problem, and actually it's even worse here with a tree branch because the shape is very random, and I will have overlapping edges that may create a problem. One thing you can do is use masking fluid, this stuff here. It's a sort of liquid latex solution that you paint on before you do your sky wash, and once it's dried you can then put the wash over the top. When your wash is dried you can then peel off the areas that you've masked. I don't like using it. I have used it from time to time in various paintings when other solutions are difficult to achieve, but it's not my preferred option, because once you've peeled off your masking fluid, you've still got to fill in your hard-edged shape. The second option is simply to use some body colour that stops your paints from being transparent. So something like titanium white, if you mix that in with your other colours, then you will have an opaque mix that will provide a light onto a dark. Now this is watercolor. This isn't gouache or acrylic or anything like that. This is watercolor, but for me it doesn't work so well on larger areas. And here, this is too large for me to paint out in an opaque color. The third way of doing it, which is a favoured way for me in this particular scenario, is to get a chisel brush like this with a nice sharp edge to it. Ensure that the brush is damp but not really wet. It needs to have a bit of moisture in it, and you use it to chip away very carefully at your highlighted area. So here, let's have one here. You don't want to do too much at once, because what you will need to do is blot that so that it doesn't leave a deposit of paint around that edge. And you can do this at various points where you want the highlights to be. And you see it's created highlight areas, but they're soft. So when I put a wash of bright raw sienna probably over that, and then some darker tone on the shadow side, you'll have a nicely defined branch without lots of nasty overlaps or white gaps. It's just my way of doing it. You don't have to do it like this. You might prefer using body colour, you might prefer using masking fluid. The most important thing is you use what you feel most comfortable using, because I can assure you, you will paint better if you do that than doing what I feel most comfortable with. But it's how I do it, and you might find that tip helpful. So what I did was re-wet the whole sky area and just came down about to the top of those chimneys there, dropped in my darker colour at the bottom of these clouds. There's a little bit more modelling in the sky as well. And then I brought that dark cloud down around the top of these chimneys. So I'm only painting that edge once. It's just the dark of the cloud that is describing the top of the house. I'm not actually painting the house to do that. I'm allowing the cloud to define that shape. That's what we call negative painting. It's very useful for defining lighter areas that have got irregular shape outlines to them. So that's pretty much finished the sky, that's defined the top of the house, and I'm going to crack on now and get a bit more done.